Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Steve Kinane. Coming up, Labor calls on the coalition to disendorse Mal Brough. How transparent would a WikiLeaks party be? And William Shawcross will be in to talk about what's the best way to put terrorists on trial. Our panel tonight, New South Wales Greens MP Cate Fairman, James Carlton from Radio National Breakfast, and Christian Kerr from The Australian. And you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag #TheDrum. Well, the opposition is standing by Mal Brough despite government calls for the former minister to be disendorsed over his links to the failed sexual harassment case against Peter Slipper. A federal court judge dismissed the claims by former parliamentary staffer James Ashby, finding it was an abusive process and designed to further the political interests of the LNP and Mr Brough. The judgment has prompted claims by Labor of a coalition conspiracy and comparisons to Watergate.
This is a conspiracy of enormous proportions, and Mr Abbott will hope that it simply blows away and then he can get on to his next smear campaign. I mean, when you consider what they have been doing, Utegate, the AWU matter where they just threw mud, they sought this mechanism, abuse of court processes to change the government of Australia. They're not interested in developing alternative policies for this country. They think that fear and smear is going to get Mr Abbott into the lodge.
The coalition has rejected claims of a plot challenging the government to reinstate Peter Slipper as Speaker.
It's not some great LNP conspiracy. It is a fact that an individual has made claims against a former employer, which they're entitled to do. The court has made a decision which they're entitled to do. But if somehow the Labor Party think that Peter Slipper is a man of great integrity, then they can put him back up as Speaker. If they think it was all wrong, everything that's happened is just a bad dream, put Peter Slipper up as Speaker again.
Shadow Attorney General George Brandis says there's no need to rethink Mal Brough's pre-selection as the LNP candidate for Peter Slipper's Queensland seat.
I don't think Mr Brough should be disendorsed. In fact, I think there is no possibility whatever that Mr Brough would be disendorsed. Indeed, I think Mr Brough, who in the earlier period of his parliamentary career had a very distinguished career, will be re-elected to Parliament next year. He will be the member for Fisher. He'll be a much better representative for the people of Fisher than the disgraced Peter Slipper has been. And Mr Brough, I think, will go on to have an illustrious future parliamentary career.
Christian, the coalition has spent the past month calling on Julia Gillard to give a full explanation about AWU. Do you think Tony Abbott and Mal Brough now need to give a full explanation about who instigated this sexual harassment case and who knew what when?
Look, I think it's very much a tit-for-tat call. I mean, we've seen the government today already really backing away from its calls yesterday for an inquiry. I mean, I think the government suddenly realised, well, spend too much time with Peter Slipper and you might die in a ditch with him. I think they sort of feel, though, that they've had their little flirtation with Peter Slipper and certainly don't want to die in a ditch for him.
Should Mal Brough be disendorsed, as the Labor front bench has been arguing today?
Well, I think he's going to wear some heat over this. I think the real lesson for the LNP and the lesson for Conservative Party generally around Australia is just stop being so damn middle class about your pre-selections. I mean, there was a whiff around Peter Slipper for a long time. In almost any other party, someone would have come forward and him. It just seems to be this still nice 1950s royal gentleman here, sort of deferral to authority that plagues the coalition parties, and they really don't get rid of MPs when they're past the use-by dates.
Cate, what do you think about the argument being put forward today by Labor that Mal Brough should be disendorsed?
Well, I think what's clear is that Tony Abbott actually needs to make a statement and do something. What Joe Hockey didn't say in his press conference was when he said that the federal court had made a decision, that decision was that Mal Brough did act with Ashby and the other advisor in the interests of the LNP and to discredit Slipper. I mean, that's a serious finding by the court. The court's findings are quite damning. So Tony Abbott does have to come out and say what he will do about this within the LNP. I don't agree that they necessarily need to go down the path of an inquiry in terms of any type of inquiry outside the LNP. I think the country wants to get on with different things next year, and hopefully this will be put to bed. But unless Tony Abbott comes out and deals with it, I don't think Labor's going to back away anytime soon.
James, is it going to be put to bed? Is it going to blow over, this one, do you think?
Well, I don't know in terms of the coverage, but I mean, I think the judge made it perfectly clear what it was, which was an abusive process, and now they play the political games. Can one comment on it? Can one not? I mean, this is a civil case, remember. Nothing sub judice here. The argument made is we can't comment on this matter because Ashby may appeal, even though he hasn't yet. I mean, if that was the standard, then the Liberals would not have commented on the Mabo case for 10 years, which is how long that was before the court. But I seem to remember they did. Look, if he gets endorsed or not, it's up to the Liberal Party. It should be up to the his local Liberal constituents who can democratically pre-select him or disendorse him, and then it'll be up to the people, and that's good enough.
Christian Malbrough has so far just released a statement. He's going to have to face the music at some point about this and answer some questions, isn't he?
Well, look, that all happened during the election campaign. I mean, the other thing to remember too, though, a lot of his, the people he hopes will become his colleagues won't really be perturbed about this at all. I mean, there's quite a queue of people looking for spots on Tony Abbott's front bench after the next election, and they'll rather be very glad to see a competitor certainly bump down that queue. Because until now, I think there would have been people who, or at least Malbrough would have expected to get onto that front bench, and now he's very much cruelled his chances. I don't think people in the Liberal Party will mind that at all. They're looking after themselves.
OK, well, the Federal Treasury is reportedly advising the government to abandon its commitment to a budget surplus. According to Laura Tingle in today's Australian Financial Review, officials in the department have become concerned about the slowing of economic growth and its impact on revenue. Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey jumped on the story today, accusing Labor of getting ready to dump its promise.
Well, it's quite clear now that the government is trying to set up every excuse it can to walk away from its own self-described solemn commitment, absolute guarantee. Failure is not an option, surplus. The bottom line is this government is to the economy what the Grim Reaper was to safe living. I mean,
James, is the government likely to follow Treasury advice on this one?
Well, the difficulty is they've handed their fiscal policy over to the winds of fate by tying themselves to a political target. I mean, say it's a $5 billion deficit. That would be an outstanding economic result, but they've dug their own grave with this nominal ambition for a surplus. So the situation, well, now is they have to make a political decision. Do they make extreme spending cuts that they never would have considered in a normal environment, or do they take the political hit of not achieving a surplus and not committing to a surplus in an election year? It's Hobson's choice.
Christian, should they surplus if economic growth slows?
I think the electorate will be understanding. The only is, as James just said, I mean, they've made this incredible rod for their own backs. I mean, we've had Wayne Swan sort of huffing and puffing away like the little red engine. You know, I think I can, and suddenly, oh, whoops, no surplus. And the other thing too is that if they do try and still generate a surplus with a whole lot of these sort of pathetic cheese pairing tricks, I really think the electorate will not like that. I think they'll sort of like a phony attempt at a surplus, much less than they'd like a sort of straight out confession, which was, well, we tried, but look at the international economic environment we're trying to deal with.
So if the government did follow Treasury advice, the economists in Treasury, how would the gallery report it? Would they say followed it in a sensible fashion, they've done the right thing, or broken promise? Would they be jumping up and down about that?
Well, I mean, I think you just look at the commodity prices that make the news all the time. We know there's been a downturn in commodity prices. We know that the mining sector is the sector driving the economy. I think we would actually be pretty hypocritical ourselves if we caned them for the fact that they had to break the promise. I think we'd cane them for the silly strategy, though, and I think quite rightly too, because they must have been aware of the weaknesses of the international economy when they set out to do this pledge.
I think the media would definitely, I can imagine the media completely caning the government over this, particularly because, of course, Tony Abbott would be repeating endlessly, you know, some slogan about breaking a promise on the surplus, and everybody would be coming out and doing it. And therefore, I'm sure News Limited and every other publication would be running with that for days and days. And that's partly, I suppose, why the Treasurer isn't backflipping yet, but it's just crazy.
But does that then come back to him making the promise in the first place?
Exactly. Yes, it does. And we've had
But just think about the dynamic of next year. When we're talking about next year's budget, Tony Abbott will have to be putting out policies. There'll be a lot more scrutiny on the coalition. It's going to be a lot harder for Tony Abbott to get away with some of the lines he's used over the last 12 months on budget surpluses, some of the glib stuff like Chris Pine's comments earlier this week. I think it's going to be harder for the opposition to come out with simplistic lines. I think there'll be a much more realistic assessment of the budgetary situation and the impact of both major parties' promises, because there'll be such single-minded focus on the election.
And Chris, is it right that Tony Abbott promised that there would be 3 budget surpluses if they won the next election?
Well, I mean, the way the coalition has sort of played the surplus game really since the height of John Howard has been, a little fraught. I mean, you could talk about the line from John Howard in the 2004 election that interest rates will always be lower under a coalition government. I mean, it's something that the government now likes taunting them with every day, even though, of course, the interest rates are at their level at the moment for very, very different reasons. For the interest rates were being at the level back in John Howard's heyday. I mean, it's one of those almost, what goes around comes around sort of things. It's one of those roundabouts and swings issues that politicians have to deal with. They make their own rhetoric. They have to deal with the consequences of their own rhetoric. And in the way politicians and their spin doctors normally do, they try and find a way of weaseling out of it.
So, Cate, if the revenues aren't there, should Labor just find more savings?
Well, no, they should never have gone into this surplus promise. I mean, both parties are acting right now very economically irresponsible. We've got every mainstream economist, every respected economist in the country saying that continuing the surplus now is a bad idea. I mean, everyone is talking in that way. So the government, what do to save $700 million? They cut 100,000 parents, force 100,000 parents onto New Start, off the parenting payment. 90% women, it's a cut of about $60, sometimes more a week, just for $700 million. Like, it's crazy. Now they're apparently scrambling around for more savings. You can imagine what they're having to look at now, scrapping the parenting payment altogether perhaps. Of course not. But it's getting ludicrous. Economists are saying this is nuts. It's better for Wayne Swan to come sooner rather than later to maybe he'll come out Boxing Day.
Okay, well, moving on now, and Julian Assange has confirmed he wants to set up his own political party to run for the Senate in next year's federal election. He says plans to form an Australian WikiLeaks party are significantly advanced, and he'll decide soon whether he'll be a candidate in either New South Wales or Victoria. Julian Assange remains holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, so he'd have to register as an overseas elector. Sam McLean from the activist group Get Up, which has been a supporter of WikiLeaks, says that could lead to an interesting contest.
It's legally possible for Mr Assange to run. Being holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy might make it a little bit difficult to campaign, but there's no reason he can't put himself on the ticket. And look, there's no legal precedent, as far as we're aware, for a senator taking a seat from outside of the country. So it could be an interesting territory there.
Cate, as a candidate for the Senate yourself, I'm sure you know how many votes it takes to get in there. What does Julian Assange need to become a senator?
Well, he needs 14.3% of the vote in Victoria or New South Wales. So, 600,000 or something in New South Wales, I think it is in terms of numbers. Percent's about 14.3. It's a big percentage.
So that's the quota without relying on preferences for other people, is that right?
Without relying on preferences. So, for example, at the last election in New South Wales, the Greens got 10.7% and we relied on preferences to get up to that full quota. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we don't know where Assange will run, but there is no doubt that he would need preferences. But I think it's a good thing, actually, that he's talking about this and talking about running. I think. So
is it a good thing if he's running against you in New South Wales? Because he could be competing for votes against you, and the Greens is the party that has defended WikiLeaks the greatest in the Australian Parliament. Yeah, look, I think the electorate out there is very open to progressive ideas, very open to progressive views. I think it's great for the national debate in terms of, in government transparency, secrecy, everything that WikiLeaks has been campaigning for and we support. I think a big progressive field is a very good thing. I also think it will add a lot of flavour and interest to the campaign. If he runs in New South Wales, I welcome it. I think we would work well together. Perhaps we'd both get in. Who knows? James?
We'll have like 15% of the vote each.
James, on the issue of transparency, WikiLeaks, the party, would have to be the most transparent political party in the history of the universe. What would we be seeing? Would we be seeing endorsed leaks from party room meetings, putting the minutes up online straight after a meeting?
Well, live telecast of the party meetings. This is an interesting point you raised, because the contemporary political party is inconsistent with absolute transparency. You just simply can't engage in the work of a political party and not keep some secrets. There's nothing sinister about that. It's just the nature of Westminster politics.
And government.
And government, indeed. What are the other qualities required in government? Compromise, negotiation, deal-making, the currency of politics. None of these are qualities Mr Assange is noted for. But there may be also another legal complication, not so much on his eligibility being on the foreign roll, but under the allegiance to a foreign power. I may be wrong about this, but section, 44(1), if he has applied for asylum in Ecuador, that may raise a question about his allegiance to Australia.
Christian, what do you think? Is Julian Assange any chance of winning a Senate position?
Well, I think both Cate and James are right. I mean, on James's point, section 44 of the Constitution, if he were to be elected, Julian Assange, I imagine, would be a High Court challenge just waiting to happen. But I think actually getting that magic 14.3%, that quota, is the real challenge for Julian Assange. I mean, to get there, he'll have to poll higher than the Greens lead candidate, poll higher than Cate if he runs in New South Wales, or poll higher than the last person on the Labor ticket to get what will be the magic 6th position, the last spot for the Senate, for whatever state he runs. I think it's very hard to imagine him even doing that.
And Christian, if he doesn't get that 14%,
is a highly controversial figure.
If he doesn't get that 14%, he's unlikely to get preferences from the major political parties, is he?
He's extremely unlikely to get preferences from any major political party. I mean, I don't know what the Green stance on this is, but it's been...
Why don't we find out?
Scott Ludlow, who's been such a supporter of Julian Assange, suddenly go very, very quiet. I mean, I imagine, depending on whether the majors gang up to mug the Greens or not, in whatever state he's in, it'll either be a Green or a Labor person getting that last Senate spot, not Julian Assange.
Well, Cate, how would you feel about preferencing Assange ahead of the Labor Party on the Senate ticket?
I'm not about to reveal our very lengthy preference negotiations with political... No, on the drum. But of course, you know...
But that would be transparent.
Yeah, it'll all be on Wiki. Of course, Assange and the Greens have been working reasonably closely on this. I mean, we have supported him, we have pressured the Gillard government to support him more. So when it comes to all of that, we obviously look at progressive parties when it comes to preferences. So, there's a long few months between now and the election, and I'm not about to...
James, Anthony Green said on his website today that he has next to no chance of being elected in the Senate. Are you willing to argue with Anthony?
A brave man will do that. He also makes the point that under Australian law, if he is still holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy and doesn't physically sit in the Senate chamber, his position can be declared vacant. It's not like the House of Commons where, Bobby Sands held a West Belfast seat, I think it was, whilst he was in H-Block prison. I mean, that can't happen in the Senate. Which is
why a second spot on the Senate ticket, if Assange does run and forms a party, will be so important.
Christian, what are your thoughts on the transparency issue of WikiLeaks suddenly having themselves to be up to scrutiny if they were a political party with some kind of power?
Well, they'd have to web stream all their meetings, wouldn't they? But then again, politicians sort of happily tweet leaks out of the party room or text message leaks out of party rooms nowadays. I mean, remember that episode, I think it was last year, with Liberals being told, you can't have your iPhones and Blackberries in there because you might be passing on a little too much. Look, I just think it's a silly little gimmick because WikiLeaks' power is essentially flagging because Assange himself has put off most of his allies. Good luck to him if he wants to run, but you can't see anything happening.
OK, well, moving on to other issues now. And the judge who led the inquiry sparked by Britain's phone hacking scandal has called for tighter regulation of online media. In a speech at Melbourne University about the challenges posed by the digital age, Lord Justice Leveson called for the law to be applied equally to the internet and the traditional media. He expressed concerns that standards could decline if bloggers and tweeters remain unchecked.
If we are to ensure that appropriate standards are maintained, we must meet those challenges and ensure that the media not only remains subject to the law, but that it is not placed at a disadvantage where the enforcement of the law is concerned. We will therefore have to think creatively about how we ensure that the law is capable of equal application and is applied equally and fairly against the mainstream media and bloggers, tweeters, and other online amateur journalists.
James, is that fair enough, applying the law equally to mainstream media and bloggers and tweeters?
I think so. It's certainly an evolving area and it's, the regulations have to keep up. I mean, there are some tweeters in Australia who have 500,000 followers, more than 500,000, which would make them have a readership more than the most popular newspapers in the country. Something needs to be done, especially given the internet is awash with half-truth, distorted mistruth, and you can see the retweeting of falsehoods can just explode, and there's this underbelly of slander that
exists. We've seen cases of that in the UK where people have been accused of being pedophiles,
wrongly accused, and indeed the person wrongly accused then sued everyone who retweeted.
Yeah. Christian, is this sound fair enough to you?
No, not at all. I mean, it's just insane. I mean, what's Alistair McAlpine pursuing people under? He's pursuing people, the former Tory treasurer who was called a pedophile. He's pursuing people under existing laws. I mean, you look at Levison's own report. He barely mentions this entire area. It's been hilarious to watch the British blogger Paul Staines, who has the Guido Fawkes website. He gave evidence to Levison and basically mocked him, saying, "You can't get me, mate. I'm based in Ireland." I mean, it's a jurisdictional nightmare. Levison barely touched this in his report. He's raising it here. Then you look at what happened in Finkelstein. I mean, this is when you do try and put it into the regulatory framework. The Finkelstein Review recommended statutory regulation for, or including the statutory regulation net, websites that got as few as, I think it was 45 hits a day. I mean, it is just an insane area. We have existing laws. Why not use the existing laws and the existing processes?
Cate, your reaction?
Yeah, look, I really don't think we can actually regulate tweets and blogs and Facebook posts across the board. I mean, obviously that's not going to happen. We've got to remember what the Levison inquiry was first set up to do. It was looking into the most powerful media body in the world, who are hacking phones, who are, influencing police, who, they are incredibly powerful body. Social media is obviously a very different space. Anybody, in some ways, can have the power. But we're talking lobbying, influence. There is no way that we'll be able to regulate, and I don't think we should. I think there should be some. Where do you draw the line? Crikey, for example, or an...
Christian, an interesting story out of the UK relating to Levison and media regulation. The Culture Secretary's advisor has been caught out issuing a warning to one journalist about her boss's ability to regulate the media. Tell us a bit more about that.
Look, this is an incredible story that the London Daily Telegraph broke yesterday. The London Daily Telegraph, of course, was the paper that, in probably one of the best journalistic coups of the last decade, I think, anywhere in the world, broke the MP's expenses story. Now, they've been having a lot of fun with that yarn ever since, and on a big day when David Cameron's government was trying to make its same-sex marriage reforms, the issue of the day, the Telegraph goes along to Maria Miller's office and says, "Hey, we've got some stuff on expenses regarding your boss." Her special advisor hit back with, "Well, she's going to play a role in Levison." And then Number 10 was silly enough to get involved with that. I mean, not only was their stance contradictory to what David Cameron's essentially said about not wanting statutory regulation of the media, I mean, it was just the perfect example of how media regulation is abused for political purposes. It couldn't have been clearer. It is perhaps the biggest single gift that could have been given to opponents of statutory regulation of media, because it just makes it so blatantly clear how it will be abused for political purposes.
Well, still on the issue of the media, and the broadcasting watchdog has announced a formal inquiry will go ahead into Sydney radio station 2Day FM. The Australian Communications and Media Authority will investigate the prank call made by presenters Mel Gregg and Michael Christian to a London hospital and linked to the suspected suicide of a nurse. She transferred the phone call through to the ward where the Duchess of Cambridge was being treated for severe morning sickness, and the investigation focused on whether 2Day FM complied with its licence conditions and the commercial radio codes of practice, and who approved the stunt to be aired. The authority has used its discretionary powers under the Broadcasting Act to commence the probe, rather than waiting for complaints. James, what do you think about this, about ACMA deciding to do an investigation off its own bat?
Well, I guess you could say this is an extraordinary change. We have ACMA, previously a toothless tiger, can only make rulings once complaints are made to it. Now it can make toothless tiger rulings on its own initiative. So I don't think it's a substantial change.
Kate, what do you hope comes out of this investigation here?
Well, it's interesting, I suppose, because ACMA can now see the public backlash in relation to the amount of social media comments, the amount of tweets and Facebook posts and everything that everybody has done on this. So I don't know whether they need to wait for a complaint as such if they see so much in the public domain anyway. The other thing it kind of does call for, I know my colleague Senator Scott Ludlam has been talking about a privacy tort, so has the Australian Law Reform Commission. I think this is something that maybe the government will look at next year when we're looking into strengthening maybe the Press Council. But it's clear that we do need something. At the moment, extreme abuses of privacy, like the one that happened in the UK, there is no law that could actually charges could be laid under.
Christian, sorry, James, you want to?
I was just going to say, so don't fall for this paper tiger that we're going to be regulating Twitter, we're going to be regulating Facebook. It's not that. The recommendation was that the existing laws must evolve to meet the evolving media landscape. That's just good policy, good legislation, because the internet is awash with falsehood, and people need to be held accountable for things they say in public, and the internet is public.
Okay, Christian, should it lead to a privacy tort, do you think, this kind of incident?
Well, look, I think that's just the perfect demonstration of what I was saying about media regulation, both here in the UK. We've had the laws, we've had the rules. What's been missing is the will. Hey, suddenly they're discovering the will. So use what you've got.
Okay, coming up next on The Drum, how has Western Justice faced the challenge of putting terror suspects on trial? We're going to talk to British author and journalist William Shawcross.
She's one of Australia's best-selling authors who works complex global issues into breezy novels. Why Di Morrissey is passionate about informing her readers about the big issues.
Whatever, I'm feeling very strongly passionate about, from that involvement, I then go to the place and the story evolves from there.
That's author Di Morrissey, A Passionate Life of Travel and Revelation.
1+1 tomorrow on ABC News 24.
A girl from the city, a boy from the bush.
I delivered her to Willeen at the age of 17, thinking this girl won't last long here, it's too bloody hot.
We called her and she said, well, I'm not coming home.
I don't think I would have made it if Francis hadn't come along.
And their race against time to rescue an historic landscape.
Now I have an understanding of the land. It's certainly a passion I've taken on.
The recovery that we've seen has just been phenomenal.
On ABC News 24.
Our guest tonight is British journalist and author William Shawcross. He's a man who's written books about a diverse range of people, including the Queen Mother, Rupert Murdoch and the Shah of Iran. He's in Australia as a guest of the Sydney Institute to talk about his latest book, Justice and the Enemy, Nuremberg, 9/11 and the Trial of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. It looks at how the US has dealt with the challenges of bringing terror suspects to trial, finding justice for the victims and also the role of military commissions. William Shawcross, welcome to The Drum.
It's a pleasure with you, thank you.
Now, your deep personal connection to Nuremberg. Your father, Hartley, was the chief British prosecutor at Nuremberg, and as a child you actually listened back to recordings of him at that trial.
That's right, yes. I listened to 78 RPM recordings, which no one knows about these days. They were very fragile Bakelite records of his testimony and his reading of testimony in the trial. And one in particular shocked me very much. It was in the first person. I saw a family of Jews being led behind a mound. They were taken off, had to take off their clothes, and then they were shot by an SS man. And I couldn't understand how my father had seen such terrible things, but actually he was reading the evidence of a German engineer who had witnessed such horrors in the Ukraine, and that was part of the evidence against one of the criminals one of the alleged Nazi criminals in the dock at Nuremberg.
And in Nuremberg, well, it's interesting that Nuremberg may not have gone ahead if Churchill had his way, because he wanted a bit of summary justice, didn't he?
The Allies all argued throughout the last stages of the war as to what to do with those Nazi leaders whom they captured. They hoped to capture Hitler, of course, and Stalin just wanted to execute as many thousands thousands, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 Germans. Churchill said, over my dead body. But Churchill thought the top 10 leaders that the Allies managed to arrest should be given a summary court-martial and executed. In the United States, there were divisions of opinion until 1945, when Roosevelt said, no, we must have a trial. And shortly before his death, he he appointed Chief Justice Jackson of the Supreme Court, to be the American chief prosecutor. And my father was his British colleague.
So if we fast forward 50 to 60 years, the US have obviously played such a massive role back in Nuremberg of making sure there was justice and there was a trial. But if 50 to 60 years forward, the US has been criticised for the way they've prosecuted terrorists in the war on terror. I'm thinking of Guantanamo Bay, indefinite detention, accusations of what they refer to as enhanced interrogation techniques. What are your thoughts on that? Has that criticism of the US been fair?
No, much of the criticism of the US, as much of the criticism of the United States all the time, is based on anti-American unfairness. And part of my arguments in this book is that the Americans have actually responded in a very cautious way, very often, to the horror of 9/11. And after 9/11, they expected, and bin Laden had promised, that the next attack would be with weapons of mass destruction. And in fact, the policies adopted by Bush have been followed mostly by President Obama, who criticized them at the time, but he has found them necessary to follow also. Guantanamo, he said, would be closed. It's been impossible to close it, because no other countries want to take most of those people. Bush closed down much of Guantanamo to begin with. There were 800 people there. When Bush left, there were 250, I think, and now Obama's got it down to about 160 hardcore people who no one wants.
You've said they were cautious, but were they cautious in the beginning? Because they seem to sweep up people who really were not terror suspects.
There were some, of course, that's true. In Afghanistan, in the sort of mayhem of the overthrow of the Taliban, when a lot of foreign fighters from the Middle East were arrested by the United States, and some of them were not. Many of them were guilty, and many of them were taken to Guantanamo and found to have very serious records. Others were found to be innocent and were let go.
We now have the situation where Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who planned the September 11 attacks, is going to face a military tribunal. But a few years ago, he was going to be facing a federal court in New York. President Obama backflipped on that issue. Why did the administration change their minds, going from a federal court back to a military tribunal?
Because when the New Yorkers heard, when Obama announced that we're going to have this trial in New York, the New Yorkers basically, as a population, said, hey, these people came here once on 9/11, we don't help them back. It'll make the city a target once again. And Obama had, as you say, to reverse himself. And he had criticized the military tribunals created by President Bush. In fact, the tribunals, now that he's adopted slightly, will go ahead in Guantanamo. And the important thing, I think, to note is that they will offer the defendants far more rights than the Nazis had at Nuremberg. At Nuremberg, there was no right of appeal. After the court made its judgment, that was that. And in Guantanamo, by contrast, anybody found guilty can appeal all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. So they have all the rights of an American citizen.
In the book, you also write about torture, and we know that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded, and George W. Bush was unrepentant about this. He wrote in his biography, "I'd do it again to save lives." Is there any evidence, though, that waterboarding actually saved lives?
Well, the evidence, Bush thinks it did. Eliza Manningham-Buller, the British head of MI5, the Secret Service, she's made a very important speech in which she said this was torture and it should not have been done, but it saved lives. But I still think it shouldn't have been done. And there, in that sort of paragraph, I think it did save lives, and I think also it provided information which eventually led to the discovery of the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden himself. But it's a terribly difficult problem.
That's very contentious, that part. We'll get to the bit about whether it did...
It's all contentious, like
whether it led to a bin Laden or not, but it's also contentious about whether it saved lives, and I've heard people argue that it costs lives to have enhanced interrogation techniques.
Well, I don't know what that argument is.
Okay, here's one argument from Ali Soufan, a former FBI interrogator who got information out of Abu Zubaydah about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. It led to them finding Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He believes if he'd been allowed to interrogate another one or two of the most senior figures of Al-Qaeda, it could have prevented subsequent bombings in London, in Bali, and also in Madrid.
We didn't have any Al-Qaeda, but well, we did have bombings in London from Islamic terrorists, but they weren't run by Al-Qaeda. They were homegrown Islamist terrorists in England, which is one of the catastrophes of the modern world. But it wasn't Al-Qaeda directed by bin Laden or anybody like. They may have been inspired by bin Laden.
Okay, but he seems to be arguing, and he used to work as an FBI interrogator, and he got the information that led them to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, that not only could it have prevented these kind of attacks, but also that waterboarding and enhanced interrogation techniques simply don't work. He said that the information that he got out of Abu Zubaydah gave that information to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed came through rapport techniques, not through waterboarding.
Well, it may well have done. I'm not in a position to criticise or to gainsay what he says. I'm sure he's a very honourable investigator, and I've no reason to suppose what he says is untrue. All I can say is that senior officials of the Obama administration, as well as Bush administration, you might argue that Bush administration officials would be apologists for the waterboarding. The Obama administration people were much against it, but many of them, including the head of the CIA, Leon Panetta, former head of the CIA, now Secretary of Defense, have said that the information derived from those sessions, difficult and painful though it is, and perhaps it was wrong, as Eliza Banningham-Buller, the head of the British Secret Service, says, nonetheless it was very important and useful.
But we may actually find out in the next week or so, because there's a big Senate committee report that could be released. It's a 6,000-page report. It's to be approved by the Senate Intelligence Committee. And it's interesting, just this week, Colin Powell's former Chief of Staff, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, said that he thinks that when it comes out, that it'll debunk the idea that enhanced interrogation worked, and it will show that it was counterproductive.
Well, I look forward to reading it.
Now, I wanted to ask you another question about the death penalty and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, because that's what he wants. So if that's what he wants, should it be given to him?
My own view is that the death penalty should never be given to anybody, whether they want it or not. Most people on the whole don't want it, but he wants to be a martyr. You're absolutely right. I think it would be better not to give him that opportunity of having his wishes.
If we go back to Ibn Cate, who was given the death penalty in Egypt back in the 1960s, he became a martyr, he became an inspiration to Islamists. Is it a counterproductive thing to give these kind of people?
Well, I already said I don't think the death penalty should be given to anybody, and yes, I think you're right, people do become martyrs.
You also write in the book about drones, and it's very interesting how President Obama has started endorsing the assassination of individuals, including an American citizen, with drones. Now, this is something that George W. Bush could not have got away with. Do you think that Obama has copped the scrutiny that he should have about the way he uses drones?
Well, I think that's a really interesting insight that you've just shown. Yes, is the answer, the short answer. Bush used drones very sparingly. Obama has used them very extravagantly would be the wrong word, but very aggressively. And I think he's killed 7 times more people in the first 4 years of his administration with drones than Bush killed in 8 years. And Bush waterboarded 3 people, only 3 people, not hundreds, and he's been condemned and abused ever since. Obama has got away with killing over 1,200 people, many of them, I'm sure, very, very guilty people who were plotting terrible plots, attacks against fellow Muslims, mostly, and against the West. But the criticism of Obama in the West has been very, very muted, and it's an extraordinary hypocrisy, I think, that Bush should be so abused and Obama not.
Okay, I want to bring Christian Kerr in from Canberra. Christian, you got a question?
Yes, look, I'm fascinated by the MI5 squeamishness as compared to the Americans. How much of this is a result of some of those domestic issues like Alistair Cameron and the sexing up of the Iraq War dossier, those sorts of angles?
Well, I don't know that that would be related to the squeamishness, as you call it. The issue of torture or enhanced interrogation, as the Bush administration called it, is incredibly difficult. It's the dilemma of the less evil. If you have and it's expressed in the phrase the ticking time bomb scenario. If you know that there's a bomb in the ABC headquarters and there's one person who can tell you if you extract the information how to stop the bomb, what methods are legitimate or not. And this debate will go on forever. And Michael Walzer, an American philosopher, wrote about the problem of, an essay called The Problem of Dirty Hands in 1973, I think. And he said the politician who feels that he has to torture to save lives will be forever, he'll live with that forever. And obviously George Bush is living with that forever. And that dilemma will go on. The dilemma of the lesser evil will always be with us.
James?
What about the International Criminal Court and the fact that the great dictatorships of the world, the evil dictatorships of the world, and the great democracies of the world that don't participate, no Israel, no Syria, no America, Is that not a vehicle? Should that not be a vehicle to aim for?
I don't think the Americans would. I mean, the Americans, as you say, are not signatories to the International Criminal Court because they feared that the court would be used for political purposes against the United States and against American soldiers carrying out their duty abroad in particular. And I don't think that the attack on 9/11 was an attack carried out, a criminal, murderous assault on the United States in the United States. And there's no reason why the United States or in any other sovereign power would use the International Criminal Court for that.
But most of the, or many people who are captured in Afghanistan are taken away for crimes committed in Afghanistan on Afghans.
Yeah, or plots against the United States.
Indeed, and but is it?
But I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's important. I mean, I think that Al Qaeda and Islamist terrorism that Al Qaeda represents is one of the most serious problems facing the world, and the United States has dealt with it actually quite effectively. It's been criticised greatly, but it's been dealt with it effectively. There's been no similar attack after 9/11 on the United States, and but it's also important to remember that most of the people Al Qaeda and other terrorists, Islamic terrorists, have killed have been Muslims.
Indeed. Well, the attacks continue to this day across the Middle East.
I mean, across the Middle East, and in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, the Taliban killed girls because they go to school. They blow up school teachers because they teach girls, etc., etc., etc. It's a huge problem for the whole world, and particularly for the Islamic world.
Just before we go, William, you've also just published a book on the Queen Mother. Did you get any insight into all those royal tours she did over the years, all the things that, as an outsider, look like they could be terminally boring, about how she dealt with those kind of royal tours? And
she loved Australia. I can tell you, writing about the Queen Mother is a lot nicer than writing about
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
If I could just read you a couple of lines she wrote about Australia in 1958. She's writing to Princess Margaret. She'd been staying on a sheep station in Queensland, and she said there were some very, very beautiful young men, all called Bill. The real country Australian is a knockout, very tall with long legs encased in tight trousers, blue eyes, a drawl and a Stetson. They're too charming for words. And the American cowboy is a mere nothing compared to the Australian.
How about that? There's an endorsement. William Shawcross, thanks very much for coming on The Drum tonight.
Thank you.
And that is all for The Drum. Thanks very much to our panel, Cate Fairman, James Carlton and Christian Kerr. And you can check out the website at abc.net.au/The Drum. We'll see you again next week. Catch you Monday.
In 1958, she's writing to Princess Margaret. She'd been staying on a sheep station in Queensland, and she said there were some very, very beautiful young men, all called Bill. The real country Australian is a knockout, very tall with long legs encased in tight trousers, blue eyes, a drawl and a Stetson. They're too charming for words. And the American cowboy is a mere nothing compared to the Australian.
How about that? There's an endorsement. William Shawcross, thanks very much for coming on The Drum tonight.
Thank you.
And that is all for The Drum. Thanks very much to our panel, Cate Fairman, James Carlton and Christian Kerr. And you can check out the website at abc.net.au/The Drum. We'll see you again next week. Catch you Monday.